Hello everyone and welcome to the December plenary session. We're joined today by Grandmaster David Howell, and it's very exciting because he's been very busy on Chess 24 and playing Magnus, working for them. So he's very hard to get these days. So yeah, we used to have him at the beginning of the year, but then he's got very busy. So hi David, and welcome to the session.
Yeah, hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. Hope you're all having a good Christmas break so far. Hope you're all ready to look at some chess as well. Shall I talk a bit about what we're planning to do maybe?
Yeah, that sounds good. Sounds great.
Yeah, so as some of you may know, I've been living in Norway for the last year and doing some commentary work. This has also meant that I've been able to spend some time with the world champion, Magnus, and obviously for the World Championship match, well, the whole world was watching, but I had some special interest there as well. So I thought it would make sense to discuss one of the games from the World Championship match. I hope all of you were following and enjoying the moves. We're going to be talking actually about the turning point, so the first decisive game from that match in game 6. As Theo says in the chat, yep, game 6. It was 136 moves. It lasted nearly 8 hours. And actually, there's some funny stuff connected to that game because on the rest day previously, I had a small chat with Magnus, and he was a bit frustrated, and he was saying he wasn't playing so well, and Nepomniachtchi was too well prepared. So I just said to Magnus, just play a rubbishy opening, play something like I do, just get your pieces out, avoid any opening theory. And I said, try and play it as long as possible. And after he won the game, he actually texted to say, this one was for you, David. So yeah, so just some small strategic stuff as well that we'll discuss along the way. But yeah, I'd like to say I'd like to think I had a little bit to do with that win at least. So yeah, Sarah, should we get stuck into the chess?
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, do share with us little insights. That'd be great. Yeah,
Okay.
great. This was such a good game. I was in London at the Chess Classic, and then I was coming back, and the game was still going on. And I was watching it on my phone. I was like, "Wow, how long could this go on for?" And wasn't it past midnight in Norway when it finished?
It was past midnight in Dubai where the players were sitting.
Yeah.
But I was commentating with Simon Williams, Ginger GM, and Jovanka Huska, and yeah, we started half an hour before the game began, and then we had to finish nearly an hour afterwards because of the press conferences and stuff. So we were live for over 9 hours in a row, no breaks. But that's one thing we'll learn from this game. Chess is about stamina and about breaking your opponent down.
You always have long games anyway. Oh, I feel like you're from Dubai. Yeah, excellent. You're right there in action.
Anyway, yeah, for those of you as well who maybe have seen some of my games, as Sarah mentions, I do like my long games, especially in classical chess. I think I've played 40 or 50 games over 100 moves in my life. So yeah, that's
really scary to watch because you get down to like 2 seconds on the clock. I'm like, David, you're going to lose on time, but you never do.
I don't recommend that. So I'm going to talk a lot about strategy, actually, including time trouble. But yeah, I don't recommend getting too long on the clock, which Magnus actually did in this game. So, okay, we'll start. I hope you can all see my screen.
Yeah,
give me a thumbs up. Okay, okay. So white. Magnus here is white, and Nepomniachtchi, the Russian, is black. B4, F6, F3, E5, and I mentioned that I told Magnus to play something outside of the main lines, and he did that now by playing G3. So he was previously playing the Queen's Gambit, and who knows what this opening is called. Okay, answers in the chat maybe.
Yeah, so it's everyone.
Okay, everyone knows it's the Catalan. That's good. So this is actually what the players were debating earlier in the tournament in game 2 of the match. And here Magnus had run into some problems because after d takes c4, queen c2, black had prepared this b5 move, and it's really sharp. Often black actually gives up this rook in the corner. Whoops, this rook in the corner by playing queen takes b4 here. And this one is incredibly complicated. And that's something nowadays as well. A lot of you guys, you'll be preparing very deeply in the openings, but that also means your opponents will be preparing deeply as well. So if you sense that they have a lot of knowledge in one opening, then sometimes it's best to steer away from that, unless you're really, really confident in the work you've been doing. And of course, Magnus does a lot of work as well, but he was just a bit worried and scared of what Nepo and the Russians and all of their supercomputers had prepared for him. So he decided, okay, it's time to go away from the main lines. So instead of that long Catalan line, which you have to spend hours analyzing, he just played G3 first. So no forcing moves, no pawn sacrifice yet. Black just copied the same development setup, just developing pieces nicely. And here again, instead of transposing back into the Catalan with C4, he tried a different move order, one which I did myself, just B3. Okay, we won't go into the opening nuances too much because 100 more moves to go. But after a trade of pawns here, C4, BC4, Queen C2, and yeah, this is thin, obviously. And this is already where Black Nepo was on his own thinking. And that's one strategy that I adopt a lot as well. Obviously, I get in time trouble myself, but I try to force my opponents to spend a lot of time in the opening by thinking for themselves. And okay, first question for you guys. After Black played Queen E7, just to defend the bishop, to try and break the pin, Magnus played Knight BD2. And this is actually a pawn sacrifice. Black can actually safely take on B3 now, because the C5 bishop is no longer hanging. And after knight takes B3, what do you guys think? Two moves for Black. This bishop is attacked on C5. So if Black plays bishop B6, how is White going to get compensation for the sacrificed pawn? Yeah, answers in the chat. It's not necessarily about speed. Oh, wow, okay. I say it's not necessarily about speed. Theo's already got there before my question was finished. Good work, Theo. Okay, so some suggestions. And in the chat, for example, Aidan is saying A4. Marcos is saying A4. Okay, I want to see the idea behind the move as well. So A4 is a very, very good move here, for example. But I want to know the idea. So this one has A5 as one possible option, hitting the bishop. The Black bishop is running out squares. But more importantly, it's actually got this bishop coming to A3. And this would be a deadly skewer. And Black can't stop both of those, and therefore Black is in trouble. So well done to all of you. I see a lot of you in the chat getting this A4 move correct. Nice one. So the second question I have is, after bishop to D6, what can White do to make sure that Black isn't just a pawn up for nothing? And you have to be energetic. And for those of you who do have experience in this Catalan, maybe you'll be familiar with one of these ideas now. Okay, so again, answers in the chat. Okay, so Aidan, remember, try and type a couple of words about the idea, maybe. You've got a good move suggestion there. Jane asks, is E4 a good idea here? That's a very, very good question. So E4, in general, it would be a good idea. You're gaining space in the center. You create a nice threat here of E5, forking these two pieces. But in this exact position, after E5, for example, now your threat is stopped. And if you ask this bishop whether he's happy about the insertion of these two moves, I don't think this bishop is too happy anymore. So we talked about the Catalan opening. This is similar. And this is the key piece, this bishop on G2. So here, I think the inclusion of these two moves only helps Black.
Isn't that what Glenn Fair used to say to us when we were kids? Talk to your pieces.
Exactly, talk to your pieces. And if one piece is unhappy, normally the rest of your position isn't great either. So here, it's just very simple for Black. Next, Black will bring them out to C6, bring out maybe to G4, and no compensation for the pawn. But meanwhile, Aidan and Theo and Kenneth as well, all getting some nice ideas in here. And it's all to do with this bishop, the Catalan bishop. And you need to get it active. It's on the best possible diagonal, but you need to clear its path. And this is quite a common idea. I saw it mentioned in the chat, knight G5, by the way, maybe lining up some threats against H7. It doesn't quite work here. It's just H6. Knight covers the h7 square. Now we have to retreat. So instead of going to g5, we go to d4. And this is actually very, very strong for white. Because now black's ideal move in knight c6 isn't really possible. I can play it, but black would actually just give back material. We can take now. Again, question for you guys: what should white play? Still a pawn down? Do we recapture, or have we got something more urgent to do? This is one thing I used to do when I was young. Just automatically, I see a pawn, I take a pawn. But, okay, so a couple of suggestions here. What are the options? Queen takes maybe, bishop takes maybe. Aiden suggesting bishop g5. That's interesting, but doesn't really threaten too much. Okay, Charlie saying knight to a5. Very nice. Knight to d4, equally strong, I think. And this is the thing. So often if you have a position where you have a choice of recaptures, of course you look at both of them, you compare them, but if your pieces are already on great squares, then don't misplace your pieces unless it's really, really worth it. So yeah, as a lot of you are now mentioning, moving the knight is actually the best way to capture this pawn on c6. If we take with the queen, we lose a bit of time. Later on, after rook b8, we get hit by bishop b7 or bishop b7. If we take with the bishop as well, black can actually just exchange off this bishop at the very least. And now this bishops will be traded, and white definitely doesn't have an advantage there. Black's rooks are very quick to come out and create some threats. So yeah, knight b4 or knight a5 are both strong here, and black is actually in quite a lot of trouble. There's no way to save this pawn, and at the very best, black can just give back the pawn, but then white has the two bishops, and we'll talk about those maybe a bit later, but at the very least, white can take back now. And here it's a bit different because these bishops are just incredibly strong for white, especially this guy. He covers so many squares, and long term as well. This pawn is very weak on a7. So, okay, well done to everyone who said knight b4, knight a5. And just remember this idea, this really instructive idea now, to clear the path to your bishop, talk to your pieces, as Sarah says, and improve those pieces if you can. So knight d4 would have been very, very strong. Also, maybe hopping over to b5, again, going for the bishop pair. I think pawns here are less important than piece activity. So, okay, so this was rejected in the game. The pawn actually did not take the pawn. He did not. C takes b3 here. He played pawn like this c6. And now after knight takes c4. Actually, when I was watching this game, I was a bit surprised because I had played Magnus in a blitz game a few months before, and we agreed that queen takes c4 was maybe the most testing move. The idea is, for example, later after bishop b2, swinging the queen across, and maybe going for an attack on the king's side. But Magnus instead chose to take with the knight. Now, Nepo actually came up with a really good move, e5. Okay, so, right, move suggestions again from you guys now in the chat. It looks like black is being a bit risky here because this bishop is super strong. But can we take advantage, or do we just have to move on knight and stay calm? Okay, I can tell you've seen this game before. It's good. So, move suggestions here. Nice one. Knight e5, knight ce5, mentioned by a few. There's two knights that could go to e5, so let me know which one you prefer. Because there are actually some really interesting options here for white. A lot of you mentioning knight e5. Any sneaky moves, maybe? Any sneaky alternatives? We've got to check, just in case they're very, very strong. I always tell myself this as well, look for those checks, captures, and threats. It sounds basic, but even the top players do this. Okay, Kenneth, knight b2 suggestion. Interesting. Aiming to come to d3. I like it. You can also get to d3 maybe by a more active path. So that's one really nice idea. D3 is actually a dream square for the white knight in these positions. So we'll mention that when we get to it. Okay, Jane, knight f to e5, also great suggestion there. Okay, so let's look at the options maybe. So knight c to e5 was indeed played, and I do think it is the strongest move. However, there were some quite cool options available to Magnus. So here, as Jane mentions, you can go knight f to e5. Trying to go for this rook in the corner. Actually, also go knight g5, which we mentioned earlier. The idea is now that we hit this knight. If the knight moves to attack the queen, maybe we step back. The issue again here is that too much is hanging. It's too complicated. At the very least, black can just deal with the threat against the rook by, for example, bishop b7. Knight takes e2 is also very strong, but bishop b7 and our knight is hanging. This pawn is hanging. We're not quite able to cash in on the h7 square because it's protected. So that's the type of move you look for in a game, just in case it's very strong, but not quite working here. And another move that actually the guy I was commentating with, Ginger GM, came up with, which I thought was incredibly clever. Just bishop to b2. Looks calm. It looks like you're blundering a piece, but after b takes c4, what's the idea now? How do we get compensation for this piece? Okay, everyone's spotting it. Nice one, knight q5. And it's the same idea. And we can come to this conclusion just by looking at knight q5, maybe on the previous move. If a tactic doesn't work one way around, we just switch the order. And here, the big difference is that we do actually have some big threats. Firstly, of course, this knight. But secondly, now we are threatening bishop takes f6, and then queen takes h7, checkmate. And it's actually incredibly hard for black to deal with all of this. Black has to now play knight e4 anyway, just like earlier, to block this bishop. But now we can take, and still some options. We can take on a8, and this does just lead to equality. So bishop takes a1, rook takes, everything getting traded, and at the very end, actually white maybe has a small advantage here just because the rook is on a very active square, some potential threats later still, but maybe it's not enough to win the game. So this is a really cool idea, bishop b2, if we go back, but it's not maybe doing the job. Also, we have to worry about things like knight b4, hitting our queen, and we have to be really careful on which square we place her. So, yeah, after bishop b2, we have so much to worry about, but also, as Aidan says in the chat, bishop b7, just ignoring this knight temporarily and defending this knight is actually black's best move, and it's not clear whether we've gained or our opponent has gained. I just wanted you guys to be aware of looking for options, especially in tense middle game positions where things are hanging, especially when there's loose pieces. There's always tactics to look for. So, okay, most of you mentioned knight c to e5. That's good. If we jump in with the other knight to e5, yes, we create a pin, but black can break the pin by knight b4, as Theo says, hitting the queen. And again, it's complicated. We don't really want to let things get out of hand, especially if we have to lose time with our queen. So this one can quite work. So knight c to e5. And now, okay, what happens if black plays bishop b7, just defending the knight? Another question for you guys. Can white profit from a temporary lack of coordination, maybe? Aidan thinks knight takes c6, but what's the follow-up? Okay. Archie thinks knight d4. Knight d4 doesn't quite work yet for white. Okay, some good answers. So, okay, knight takes c6 is the answer indeed. Takes, and now, because of this pin, e4 wins some material. And if this black bishop moves, we win the bishop behind on c6. And black, meanwhile, tries to trade off some pieces by taking on f3. We just take back. Now this rook in the corner is hanging, and this bishop is also hanging. And black doesn't necessarily lose material after bishop b4. But for example, another situation like this where we take, and even if we just drop back, white is doing very, very well again. This bishop completely dominates any square this white wants to jump to. And the bishop back, it's all about the bishop back. And there's pawns on both sides of the board. White will always have an advantage with the bishops. Okay, so if we jump back, b5, knight e5. So black couldn't play bishop b7, so black had to counter back. Knight b4, hitting the white queen. We won't go too much into the details here. There's a few squares this queen can use. At some point, you can come across and up the board. Maybe this is for more attacking players. But you do maybe run into some attacks with knight e4 at some point. Some calculation is needed. So for the safer players, for players who like to take a bit less risk, like me, queen b2 is the most logical. As Aidan says, this is what Magnus played, queen b2. Now after bishop b7, just a3, kicking back the black knight. The knight retreats, and because Magnus wants to win this game, he didn't want any exchanges, didn't want to make things easy for the opponent. He just stepped back away from the knight trade. And this is what we mentioned briefly earlier. Knights on the d3 square in Catalan, it's hard to explain why, but they are just the perfect piece. I guess it's because they are anchored by pawn, they're supported by pawn. You can nearly never get rid of them. And as we see in a couple of moves' time, bishop c6, bishop g5. Okay, we'll come to this move, but later on, you can imagine white playing rook a c1, you can imagine white playing b4, and using this c5 outpost for the white knight. So if any of you have experience in these positions, then that's great, first of all. But secondly, just remember in future, a knight on d3 is always strong, and we'll see that knight being strong later in the game as well. Also, check out the games of Ulf Andersson, a Swedish grandmaster, if you want to see why the knight on d3 is so good. One of the best positional players probably from the last 100 years. So that's just a bit of pattern recognition. Magnus recognizing that the knight stands well on d3, and it actually sits there for a long, long time now. So okay, here Magnus played bishop takes f6, and this actually surprised me at the time. But I guess the question is, why didn't Magnus just play rook a c1? Why didn't he just improve a piece? Invite every piece to the party. Again, question for you guys. What would have happened here? Why did Magnus reject this move? And then Theo will come to the shot on f6, key moment. Okay, knight d4, suggested by Aidan and by Kenneth. And this is very strong. So that's the thing, in a lot of positions, you're tempted to trade, especially if you can give your opponent double pawns, if you can weaken their structure. But often as well, you kind of want to wait for black to play a move at h6, and only then you take, because then black is wasting a move with one very, it's just not a useful move simply. But the problem here is for black, there is a more useful move indeed than h6, and that's to jump in to b4. And now, anytime you take on f6, for example, if you do it instantly, the black queen simply takes, and there's no more exchange. And actually, if anything, white is in trouble here because the white queen is loose, the black queen doing great. Now it's black who has two great bishops on these two squares. So that's why Magnus took immediately. A bit of a surprising move, but the bishop takes f6. Now, at least if black does take with the queen, and Theo, I saw in the chat, thought this was maybe more logical. At least now black does get double pawns, the queens do come off the board, and after rook a to c1, maybe it should be equal with best play, but white has a clear plan of planting a knight into c5, and black has to be very energetic now to hold the balance. Now c5 is coming. If black, for example, tries to swap off some pieces with knight d4, then now knight takes d4, bishop takes g2, and this type of position, yes, black has a bishop, which should be better with pawns on both sides of the board, but this white knight is incredibly hard to kick away, and white can simply plant a rook on c6, maybe activate the other rook. If black ever tries a move like, for example, rook c6, if black ever tries e5 to kick this knight away later, then black only weakens himself mean, f6 was actually just hanging there as well, but just to demonstrate the idea, any pawn pushes for black will give the white knight some squares. That's why the knight on d3 was so good. It's flexible to jump to both sides of the board. And black's pawn structure is just, yeah, not ideal here. So, yeah, it's a matter of taste in this type of position if we backtrack after bishop takes f6. But Nepo, because he's a dynamic player, as Theo mentions in the chat, he decided to keep the queens on. And he takes f6. And this is possible because white doesn't have any attacking pieces to go for the black king. So this type of structure is not ideal for black. But bishop pair in return and no attacking pieces for white. Okay, so rook c1, just improving a piece. And black played knight to d4, trying to swap stuff off. Maybe black just decided there's not much reason to just maneuver anymore. It's time to be direct. For example, rook ac8. At some point, white will have ideas of b4, to maybe at least force black to trade off one of the bishops. So knight b4. We saw lots of pieces coming off the board now. Queen a2, a sad necessity just to defend this pawn. This a3 pawn weak. The white's queen now on a pretty bad square. And take, check. And another instructive moment. Some viewers were expecting Magnus to play f3, but this is very, very committal, and it's not really nice to give your opponent all the dark squares. So, for example, now black can plant a bishop on e3, and you'll never ever kick away this piece. Rook c2, for example, rook c8, and it's also incredibly hard for white to challenge for this open c file now, because the black bishop controls c1 square. This rook is unable to join the pawn. So, yeah, when in doubt, I would recommend not committing the pawn structure around your king too much. So, king g1 and queen to e4. These two pieces very, very strong now. Queen c2. And after a5, very clever move, aiming to maybe a4 and fix this pawn on a dark square as a target for later. We'll see that happen. With fd1, and now king to g7, a sneaky move. So you can see what happens if white, for example, plays knight f4. Because it looks like black's queen is really strong. It looks like we might want to trade her off the white queen, but can we do that now? Okay, answers in the chat. Okay, Kenneth and Theo, very quick. I'm going to challenge the rest of you to be a bit quicker now with some of these tactics. Okay, so knight f4. Okay, this does allow, again, captures, queen takes queen, and now bishop takes f2. This is why we always look for those checks. And suddenly, next move, the rook on b1 drops. And at the very end, white has lost a rook for knight and a pawn along the way as well. So white is actually a bit stuck in the current position. We can't even move the knight because the rook on d1 would be loose at the end. That's why Magnus just lifted his rook up, rook b2. And again, a very instructive idea for anyone who's maybe struggling in these complicated middle games. Just keep everything nice and protected. So rook b2, and now white has ideas, for example, of just moving the knight because the rooks will be connected if black just plays a quiet move. After knight f4, now the queens can come off the rooks and each other, but also creates some ideas, for example, of just retreating the white queen, trying to create a pin on this line, maybe moving the knight out of the way next. So a quiet move, mysterious move, definitely a lot of ideas behind it. And now, big moment by Nepo, he decided to play rook a to c8. Theo mentions that maybe f5 by black. Theo, this is one thing that you should try and cut out though from your game. It says that you prefer f5 and it should be a draw. But why should it be a draw? There's queens on, there's rooks on. Don't think about the result. Don't make assumptions. That's one thing. That's why Magnus wins so many games, because he never makes assumptions. For example, here he could play queen d1, Next move, you might play e3, keep you back. You might play knight f4, go towards your king. This game still has so much life in it. So, and yeah, if you say the bishop might go to f6, but then the bishop's less active. White's rook can come in. Okay, maybe it's equal, but that doesn't mean a draw. So that's one thing I noticed from players who analyze a lot with computers. They make assumptions. They see 0.0, but the top players, they ignore that. They just look for ideas and resources. So no assumptions about looking for results or assuming it will be a draw. This one, I would say, is very, very far from draw. So exactly, as Aidan says, engines might say 0.0, but that doesn't mean it's a draw. And we're humans. Humans blunder, even world champions, as we'll see in a minute. So instead, rook a8, and Magnus could just drop back with the queen, but it's a bit sad, it's a bit passive. There are ideas such as bishop c3, hitting the white rook, and then just b4, cementing this bishop on a nice outpost. And now these two rooks passive. White is still maybe okay, but for example, after taking and just rook a2, maybe queen f1, get the queens off. But yeah, it's not much fun for white. So Magnus decided, okay, it's trying to risk it. Queen takes c8, and queen for two rooks. Usually you would prefer the two rooks, but here the rooks can't coordinate. And these two pieces are just incredibly strong. So yeah, it's not clear who this favors, and indeed, even computers get confused around here. So don't trust them. Queen to d5. Hitting this pawn on b3. This pawn push forward, and again, another instructive moment. Black doesn't want to trade these pawns because now white has no weaknesses. This knight guards everything. It guards f2, it guards b4, and the two rooks will eventually coordinate, and two rooks are worth more than a queen technically, so the rooks would be the favorite here. That's why the pawn actually had to go for targets, and in endgame is where there are queens on the board. Just remember, fix your opponent's targets. And yeah, black has a clear plan. Queen b3, and queen takes a3. So this a3 pawn, very, very weak. Okay, so now white plays e3, attacking the back bishop, and another question for you guys: what should black try here, or what could black try? So the bishop is attacked. You move it. Do you have anything else you could do? And if you do move the black bishop, then where do you put it? What are the safe squares? What are all the options? And while you guys think and while you type, some move suggestions here and idea suggestions. I should just mention, so this is already around move 30, and the players were both quite low on time, but Magnus here had less than 10 minutes to make 10 moves before he gets more time. So that's what I would call time trouble. And Nepo actually, meanwhile, had 30 minutes, but he rushed the next few moves. He played instantly. He was trying to play against his opponent's time. And as one of the leading experts on time trouble, I will say that the most unpleasant thing when you're low on time is for your opponents to actually just sit there and slowly think about every option. Because when you're low on time, your heart is pumping, the adrenaline is rushing. It's hard to stay calm and just calculate. It's hard to stay calm and just kind of be objective. So if your opponent is low on time, don't rush with them, because then you're just playing blitz against each other. Then it's just 50-50 and anything can happen. Just sit and slowly consider your moves. For example, Nepo actually had 30 minutes here. He could have spent 10 minutes now and then played the next 3 or 4 moves quickly, and then spent another 5 minutes and then played quickly. Changing the pace of your thinking is the most unpleasant for your opponent if they're low on time. So just a tip for everyone, because I've seen a lot of junior players, and if their opponent is low on the clock, less than 10 minutes left, they try and blitz them. But then often you blunder along the way, not just them.
I bet you've had loads of people try and do that against you in your time.
Yeah, actually I win half of my games because my opponents tried to flag me and they just blunder along the way. And some of you may have seen, I played at the Grand Swiss recently, a really strong tournament with lots of top grandmasters. Most of the top 100 in the world played there. And I actually beat several grandmasters because they tried to play against my clock. And they tried to trick me. But yeah, if they had just sat there and slowly considered their moves, maybe it would have been more unpleasant. Okay. Anyway, back to the chess. And I see a lot of good suggestions.
It's
in the
really funny when you play Greshuk, because you're double addicts. And you are.
Yeah, I will, exactly. Yeah. We both had 1 minute left after 15 moves.
Crazy.
But not to be recommended. Don't do it, guys. So, okay, I see a lot of great suggestions here. So bishop e5 was mentioned. This was actually played in the game, and this is the safe option. So nice one who said bishop, to those who said bishop e5. I also like this suggestion, I think by Aidan, bishop to a1. That would have been really unpleasant for Magnus to face because low on the clock, you have to suddenly worry about how to kick this bishop out of your position. Is a really weird move, but the weird moves are the best ones when your opponent's low on time. So this would have been maybe a nasty surprise for Magnus. It doesn't necessarily threaten anything, but it's just deep in White's camp here. And later on, there will be ideas with this bishop. But one of the ideas with the bishop is the one that's been mentioned a lot now in the chat recently by Charlie, Theo, Kenneth, Aidan, lots of you. So bishop to b2. And this move wasn't even on Nepomniachtchi's radar. Some of you may have seen the game. Maybe that's why you're aware of bishop b2, but some of you won't have seen the game. And just by talking things through in 2 or 3 minutes there, you came up with this cool idea. Nepomniachtchi, if he'd done the same, if he hadn't played instantly, if he just sat on his hands for 2 minutes, maybe he would have found this idea. And computers eventually show that it should be a draw, bishop b2, but it's very difficult for White. For example, here, this pawn is attacked. We can't take this bishop with our knight because the knight is pinned. Our rook would drop. Our knight's actually trapped as well. And if we take with a rook, then there will be some trouble ahead. After queen takes b3, this pawn is simply dropping off the board. We can't defend it with rook a2 because of queen b1 check. That was attack. So after bishop b2, maybe what scared Nepomniachtchi was rook to c5. But after a simple move like queen to b6, just retreating, we can see that it's pretty much the same thing. So rook takes b2, queen takes d3, and here White has to be very, very careful to make the draw. So queen takes a3 is inevitable. This pawn is dropping, and actually White pretty much only has one move to save the game. Has to play rook to c2, just so this rook isn't hanging. And black takes on a3, and this one is still complicated. After queen takes a3, rook takes b5. But it's clear black should never really be in trouble here because at the very least, you just move the queen. You can play queen b3, you can also play queen b3. And this pawn is running forward very fast. And I just have a feeling with less than 10 minutes on the clock to make 10 moves, this would have been incredibly difficult for Magnus. And yeah, the black queen and black pawn together will cause a lot of problems. The main issue for White is you can't organize both of the rooks to attack the pawn from the same side. So queen versus rook positions is all about coordination, and here White lacks coordination. So this would have been incredibly difficult for Magnus, this bishop b2 move, but Nepomniachtchi missed it. So that's why always look for resources and always take your time. So okay, bishop e5 was played, safe and not bad. So White now played h4. It's a bit unclear what White should be doing with the rooks. For example, rook c5 might be a good square, but you do lose a bit of time. Again, you ask black to play queen b3, which is a bit scary. So h4 instead. I think Magnus just wanted to maybe put the king on h2 in some lines where there won't be any checks. Now Nepomniachtchi again could have played bishop e2 if he wanted. Maybe it should be a draw, but White is the one struggling for the draw in a position, as we saw. It hasn't changed much. Nepomniachtchi here again, he made a bit of a mistake long term. He played h5, and he just wasn't thinking. He wasn't using his time. And now this pawn in h5, yes, it stops White advancing, but it's a weakness. And as we see later in the game, the White knight can go for this pawn. And also the black king lacks shelter now, because the black king in some lines could hide on h6 away from any checks. But now if the king ever hides on h6, then the white rooks will simply come behind. Now, king to h2 was played. Magnus just waiting. This is very instructive as well. We talked about what to do if your opponent's low on time. Just sit there, calmly think, just forget about the clock, forget about your opponent's clock at least. But when you're in time trouble, just keep things nice and safe. Avoid checks, keep everything protected. This king move means there's no back rank checks now. we'll see in a moment why that's so important. Bishop b2 was finally played by black. It's actually a mistake in this exact position. But yeah, it's incredibly hard to spot why it's a mistake. At the very least, though, we can see Magnus's idea. So here he played rook c5, very logical, but if he takes knight, now white can simply play rook a2 if necessary. It's still a bit of a sad move because the rook's passive, but there's no more check on b1. And that's why Magnus put the king on h2. Queen b1 now will simply be met by rook c to c2, and the rooks will defend each other, and white pretty much has a fortress here. The black queen alone will not be able to win the game. So this would have been a safety net for Magnus. Instead, he played rook c5. Black got back to b6. Okay, question for you guys. We haven't had a question for a while. So what would have happened if black went to this square, to b7, to defend the pawn? What was the big difference? This one is hard. So congrats to anyone who finds it. White actually has a winning idea here. And it's not just one move, so I'm not looking for one move in the chat. Okay. Archie, I like your idea of moving the white knight. Unfortunately, right now, the white knight is pinned, so the white rook on d2 is hanging if you move the knight. So keep that one in mind for later, maybe. But that's the thing. We see these ideas, and we just need to put them together in the right order. And, okay, that's why a couple of you have found the right move now. And it's all to do with this rook. So we want to move the knight. We want to take this bishop, for example, but we can't because the rook behind would drop. So we just defend the rook. Rook c to c2. And suddenly this bishop is actually trapped. Here, bishop takes a3 is pretty much the only safe square. If we go back to e5, then now your move, Archie, knight takes e5. And the difference is the rooks protect each other and we win. So instead, bishop takes a3 and now just rook to a2. And this bishop is actually trapped. It can give itself up for one pawn, but it won't be enough. Eventually, the rooks and the knight together will win against the black queen. Black's pawns are also easily protected, easily blocked. So that's why in this position, queen to d6 was very important. And now the main idea is that if white tries the same, rook c to c2, bishop takes a3, rook a2, and now black can take on b4 and it's protected. And actually, Magnus here, he did miss a very instructive, a very surprising way to win. He could have actually gone straight for the black king here. For a human who only has 3 or 4 minutes left on the clock, this is incredibly difficult to spot. 4 would have actually been winning after queen to b4, and the black queen out of attack. White can just go for the black king now, so rook to d7. You can also start with rook to d8 and try and come behind. You can line your rooks up in the 8th rank and try to go for the black king. But rook to d7 is surprisingly strong. And just to show you guys one idea after e5, maybe here, this pawn was hanging as well. That's why, whoops, sorry, this pawn was hanging. That's why e5 is a logical move. Yeah, maybe this is what Magnus missed, I was going to say. So knight takes h5 check, king to g6, and looks like white's knight is trapped, but an amazing move here would have won the game. Rook to c6, and I mean, this is just incredible. King takes knight, rook takes f6, and this black king is actually doomed. Black is so much material up, but this black bishop is offside. Black queen can't get back to help the king, and the king has no protection around it. So whatever black does, for example, try to centralize the queen, just rook takes f7, and sooner or later, this king will just be mated. Ideas like f3 and g4, ideas like just rook to g7 and rook to g5, this king is trapped. So, okay, this type of thing is incredibly difficult to spot, but if you have time, always remember the active ideas. I think Magnus realized he was on the defense, and that's why he failed to spot in this position. He could just give up everything on the queen side, give up all of these pawns, and just go for checkmate. So, okay, let's carry on. Long game and a lot to get through. So, e1 was played instead, creating the threat of knight takes b2 because the knight would defend the rook on d1. Bishop takes a3, rook takes b5. So some pawns disappearing and queen to d7. So Yeah, 2 rooks against the queen. It's all about coordination, and the rooks still don't coordinate yet. Magnus managed to coordinate his rooks with the help of Nepo. So rook c5, and actually, yeah, Theo mentions it in the chat here. Bishop takes b4 is simply possible here for black. It's possible now or on the next move. So this is another thing. It's just a practical bit of advice. If you see a good move, if you're low on time, just play it. As long as you make sure that the tactics are working in your favor, that you're not losing a piece or hanging anything, just get to move 40, get your extra time. Or for example, if you're playing rapid chess, just get that extra 15 seconds on the clock or whatever increment there is. And yeah, just keep things nice and simple if you can. Simplicity is the key. I hate to calculate long variations. Sometimes you have to, but if you can, keeping things simple. It's just incredibly annoying for the opponent as well. It means they can't complicate things if they're struggling. And that's why Nepo should just take this pawn. The pawn is for free. You can't take it back now because the rook on d1 hangs. And after bishop takes b4, for example, rook c4, white now is in big trouble. Black can just put the bishop on any safe square, and this pawn is going to be deadly. Maybe white can stop it, but it's going to be incredibly hard. And also, for example, knight b2, it does attack this pawn, and it does also defend the rook on d1. But as maybe some of you will have spotted, just queen to b5, and no coordination between white's pieces. This is attacked. This knight is overloaded now. You can't move it because this rook is also attacked. This would just be deadly. So yeah, computers say that maybe white can hold, but I think low on time, it would have been tough, I guess. So, okay, instead, black got a bit clever, e5, e4, c2. And now, again, bishop takes b4. It's just a free pawn. Black can drop the bishop back and start pushing this guy forward. Would have been very strong, but queen d5 made things complicated and allowed the rooks to connect. So queen d5, maybe aiming queen d3, but keep things simple. That's what I would have told Nepo after the game. And after rooks e to d2, finally these rooks connect. And also there is some kind of threat in the position at some point of rook a2, trapping this black bishop. Also, b4 is not on freeze now, because we can just take it back and rooks behind each other. So just to fast forward, queen b3 was played, rook a2. Again, the idea is bishop takes b4, now just rook b2, and we win this piece in this move. So after e4, you can suggest now how white can untangle and obtain a good position. It's still not easy. You need to be a bit clever because your knight is attacked and this pawn is also about to drop. Okay, so Archie says knight c5. Nice. Aiden says knight c5. What will happen next? That's my question for you guys. Theo says knight c5, and then knight takes a4, coming soon. Okay, some great suggestions here. A lot of you have said knight c5, and that is correct. I would have been tempted personally by knight f4 myself, going after the h5 pawn, but maybe it's disconnecting the white knight from the white rooks. And I think maybe that is the more urgent issue. So bishop takes b4 now, and yes, you can play a move like rook e to b2, but still incredibly complicated. And also maybe back even with the queen just to stop. So knight f4 should also be on your radar. It's a decent move. But knight c5. That's the queen, and we always look at these moves first because they are more forcing. His reply is pretty much forced. He has to move his queen. He has to take this pawn. And now, a few of you mentioned rook c2 here. Knight takes a4, possibly on the cards at some point. For example, rook c2, if that just moves, passes, and knight takes a4 is a really nice idea. With the idea of rook c3, pinning and winning this bishop. But after rook bc2, maybe black has options. For example, black can play ideas like queen b1 at some point. Trying to think what else. Maybe rook dc2 is a clever move. I'm sure Theo's analyzed this. But knight takes e4 is just the simple way of doing it. Nice little tactic. So this is overloaded now, the black queen. If it takes the white knight, then rook takes a3. Actually, white is just winning the same game because the black queen is also teamed up with really, really bad pawns. And rook b to a2, next move will win this remaining passed pawn. So, okay, queen b3. And okay, Aidan says, how about king g6 after that takes e4? Maybe, possibly. You do have to worry about what will happen, for example, after rook b3, hitting this bishop. I think personally, this looks quite strong for white. If the bishop moves now, then there might be rook b4. Anyway, there's lots of options for both sides. And this was the magical move 40. So black simply played queen b3 and gained a bit more time on the clock. And just to fast forward now, because there's still about 90 moves left of this game, I just want to pinpoint two special moments. So first of all, if we fast forward, the game didn't change too much. There was just a lot of maneuvering. White's knight eventually came around to this dream f4 square. So for example, white was able to maneuver the knight. We saw come around to f4, and now we see white h5. All those moves ago was such a bad choice by Nepo. This pawn is now incredibly weak. But yeah, if we fast forward to this moment, we see that Magnus tried to transform the position and he played rook takes a3. So, okay, two options for black. What do you guys think is the best move here? So black has two main options. One of them, probably the obvious, bishop takes a3, and the other, banana, bishop takes a3 wasn't actually played in the game. Okay, queen takes h4 check. Nicely spotted by Aidan and Theo. Yeah, so actually in the game, queen takes h4 check was played after king g1. There was no time to take this rook because the black queen was under fire. I should also mention this is a pin, so we can take the queen back. And maybe Nepo actually here, he'd underestimated the fact that after bishop takes g3, white can just take back and run away with the king. And once the king gets to safety, the white knight is super strong and the rooks will team up together. This should be winning for white. So in this position, queen takes h4 is not bad. Computers say it's fine, but I do feel that bishop takes a3 maybe would have been the safer option. And here, it's equal material. White has a rook, knight, and pawn for the black queen. But I think if black just waits and sits forever, it's going to be incredibly hard for white to win. There's no way to create a passed pawn, or no easy way. And black can just sit with the king on g6, for example, and eventually this game should be a draw. So sometimes patience is the key. Instead, we saw queen takes h4, g1, and here white was able to move the rook away. And this trade of black's very, very strong a3 pawn for white's h4 pawn definitely favored white. And yeah, if we fast forward again, as Theo mentions, actually, this position, after a lot of maneuvering, this is about 20, 30 moves later, we saw white seemingly in a bit of trouble because this e3 pawn is under fire. And okay, everyone apart from Fiona, what can white play to deal with this threat on e3?
Or maybe Theo could just message you privately.
Yes. Okay, nice one, Kenneth. Archie, good suggestion, rook to e5. Which rook? Which rook do you want to put on e5? And also another question to everyone else. Rook, for example, rook f to e5 or rook b to e5, what will black's next move be? So there's a small trap in the position. It looks like this pawn is under fire. But yeah, as some of you are saying now, if one of the rooks defends this e3 pawn, then this e3 pawn can actually be captured anyway. So that's why we always look for the checks, even if it looks like they've been prevented. Bishop takes e3, and after the rook recaptures, the other rook falls. And it's the same if white defends this pawn with the other rook as well. If rook f to e5, still bishop takes e3, because after rook takes e3, the other rook drops. And that's why it's maybe a bit of a tricky situation here, which Nepo actually had thought he'd managed to trick Magnus because his queen is eyeing up both his rooks and this pawn is hanging. But it turns out Magnus was the one doing the tricking. And as some of you said, rook takes f7 check, giving up the rook. After king takes f7, you win the bishop. And in the process, you've won most of black's pawns. And again, this is just a practical endgame now. And I would not trust computers. Computers say, of course, it's a draw, 0.0. But when I was looking at it, when I was commentating, when Simon Williams, Ginger GM, was also commentating, we were both pretty sure that white would win because here it's just incredibly easy for white to play. White will at some point start pushing these pawns forward. And what can black do? Black has to just aim for the actual check, but it's incredibly tough to do that because of the white knight. White's knight is such a good defender. There's no checks at the moment. For example, even if, not queen takes knight, even if you get your queen round to the other side, say white just makes a move, even if you get your queen round, and the white king will hide the other side of the knight, and you just go round in circles with black, there's no way you will ever win because everything's defended in white's camp, and the knight is just the best defender. So I always say a knight is a king's best friend, but this knight helped Magnus win the game. And okay, the players actually went round in circles for a while. If we just fast forward another 30 moves now, we see that not much changed until this position. And white has finally found the dream setup with a rook on d4 and knight on e2, defending each other and getting ready to push this pawn forward. And that's another thing I would say, never rush in endgames, especially if you're on the side who is in control. If you have a plan, but your opponent doesn't, that doesn't mean you have to rush with the plan because your opponent will see it come. Just be patient and wait for the right moment, and that's what Magnus did. And here, he finally played e4. So avoiding the 50 move rule. So, the rule exists where if you make 50 moves without moving a pawn or trading a piece, then the game is a draw. So Magnus, he just waited, he built up some time on the clock, he get 30 seconds after every move, and now he pushed the pawn forward. And some players play e4 on move 1. I feel like myself, but here Magnus played e4 and move 110. So, just I found that quite entertaining. And now, yes, black was actually able to trade off his pawns here, but this doesn't really help because white has 2+ pawns and black is still struggling. Queen alone, she can create some threats, but white actually has 4 pieces, a rook, knight, and 2 pawns, and together they do overpower that queen. And again, just to fast forward, it's still incredibly difficult, but to show how Magnus won the game, we can fast forward to this moment. Oh, so many moves. Okay. Queen to h7, and this is move 133. So black's queen is attacking this rook, but white does have a winning move here. And okay, what can it be? What can white play to win, or to at least make progress and create some deadly threats?
Great, but it's an illegal move.
Yeah, yeah. Charlie, you're right. Knight f6 would be ideal, but with a fork, a royal fork, hitting the queen and rook, queen and king even. But yeah, unfortunately, as Sarah mentions, this is a pin. So you would love to move maybe the king out the way, but if you move your king, you might walk into some checks. So we can't move the knight. We don't really want to move the king.
If in doubt, push a pawn.
Yeah, when in doubt. Yeah, and also look for your opponent's threats. So, for example, here, black does, well, it looks like black does have one threat, but it's not a real threat. After e6, a lot of you are suggesting, well done to all of you who said e6. It turns out I can't take this rook because of knight to g7, again with a fork, because the pin has been broken, so we can move our knight. And e6 was actually the winning move. This was the one that actually missed. The way black should have drawn actually this game was to have the queen around the other side. The queen should be on, for example, on h1, checking the white king from behind. But the queen kind of trapped itself in front of the white knight, so white's knight acts as the perfect shield for the king. And now one more test for you guys. One last sneaky clever move to win the game after queen g6. As Theo as well, Theo private messaged me, he said, okay, it's a table-based draw, but this is a practical game you just have to play on. Always play every single game to the end, no matter how drawn they look, no matter how boring they look. That's the only way we learn about games. And that's the only way you get these extra half points here and there. Magnus tied out his opponent. And okay, nice one. Okay, Archie, well done. Bordana, well done, Kenneth. All of you who said rook to f7. I hope you did some calculation, because there's some calculation to do here, but this is the winning move. Now there's a simple plan of f5, f6, for example. Also, like g7 is an immediate threat, and then pushing the pawn next move once you kick away the black king. The key question is what to do after queen takes b6. Looks like we've lost a pawn. And now who can give me the key variation? Don't stop too soon. I want the key move at the end. Okay, so a lot of you saying knight g7 check. Congrats, that's the best first move. That's a fork.
You need to know it's a winning king and pawn engage before you play.
Yeah, exactly. You have to calculate it to the end, because you might see that you win the black queen. After takes, there's only one winning move for white now. You have to go in front of our pawn. So as Jane says, as says, king g5, nice one. On Katie as well, king g5. So we want to go king g6 and kind of help shepherd our pawn forward. But if black plays king f7, only one move wins again. Nice. Everyone's saying king f5. Well done. So we get the opposition. Actually, this position with white to play is a draw, but with black to play is winning. And the reason we're winning is because black's king has to give way. It has to go to one side, and then we step the other way. For example, if it goes this way as well, we go the other way. And eventually, our pawn will come forward and win. So king and pawn endgames, I'm sure you know them all, but we need to know them instantly in order to calculate these long variations sometimes and evaluate them correctly. So this was impossible for black. And just to show how the game finished, black played king d8, 5, and now a really nice finishing touch. Actually, many moves win here for white, but just knight to g7, creating the winning threat of e7 and e8 queen, but more importantly, creating a nice, safe hiding place for this white king. So where's this king going to hide if there are some checks? Last question of the day. If black gives some checks now, what are we going to do? Okay, nice one. See some correct answers already. You're right, the king will zigzag its way up the board later on and hide on g8 away from any checks. And that's why we do say the knight is the king's best friend, because I mean, how good is this knight right now? It's done all the work, this game. It started on the d3 square, which we said was a fantastic square, and now it acts as the king's shield once more. No more checks, and these pawns simply win the game. So in that position, after knight to g7, Nepo actually just resigned. He didn't even want to give any more checks. And there we go, Magnus won, and the rest is history. Nepo, I think, was exhausted after this 8-hour game. He couldn't recover psychologically. He was winning maybe at some point, then he was drawing for so long, for 100 moves, he had an equal position, but he couldn't hold it. And that's another thing I would say to you guys. Always play every endgame out to the end, because that's how you learn, but also you tire out your opponents. And even if it doesn't help in that game, even if it's a draw in the end, you take so much away from the game. And yeah, it's great practice. The top players in the world, it's not just about the mental stuff, it's not just about the chess, it's also being physically fit and also enjoying these types of playing games. So, okay, a lot of stuff to process in that game. I know it was only 1 hour and we had to cover 136 moves. So thank you for your patience, guys. And also, yeah, well done. Some great suggestions and some great answers along the way.
Thanks very much, David. It's not often we get you here now. You're so busy, and David's also British champion many times, and he's been over 2,700. He's good mates with Magnus Carlsen. So I think it's really good that you've given your time to come here today and help us. So thank you very much.
That's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.